Your subwoofer cost hundreds of dollars and it's supposed to deliver earth-shaking bass that makes action movies feel like a theater experience. But instead it sounds either weak and ineffective or boomy and muddy with no detail. Before you blame the subwoofer itself or start shopping for a bigger upgrade, I need to tell you something critical. Your subwoofer probably isn't broken or underpowered. One wrong setting is destroying your bass, and I'm about to show you exactly which settings to check and how to fix them so your bass finally sounds tight, powerful, and properly integrated. Before we dive into the specific settings that are sabotaging your low-frequency performance, hit that subscribe button and drop a like if you're frustrated with disappointing bass despite owning a decent subwoofer. Comment below and tell me what subwoofer you're using right now and whether your bass sounds too weak, too boomy, or just muddy and unclear. Why your bass problem isn't what you think. Most people assume bass problems mean they need a bigger subwoofer with more power and a larger driver. They're running a 10-inch sub and they convince themselves they need a 12-inch or even dual 15s to get satisfying bass. But here's what almost nobody understands. Bass performance in your room is determined far more by setup, settings, and room acoustics than by subwoofer size or power. A properly configured 10-inch subwoofer will dramatically outperform a poorly set up 12-inch sub every single time. The reason is that bass is incredibly sensitive to timing, phase relationships, room modes, and integration with your main speakers. When any of these factors is wrong, bass either cancels itself out and disappears, or it reinforces unevenly, creating boomy peaks and weak nulls. Your subwoofer might be producing tremendous output, but if it's arriving at your ears out of phase with your main speakers, the bass cancels at certain frequencies and you perceive it as weak. Or your subwoofer might be cranked up so high that it's overwhelming and muddy, masking all the detail that makes bass enjoyable rather than just loud. The good news is that every common bass problem has a setup solution that costs nothing. You don't need new equipment. You need to understand which settings are wrong and fix them systematically. Problem 1. Gain set too high, creating muddy bass. The most common mistake people make is cranking the subwoofer's gain or level way too high. The logic seems reasonable. You want powerful bass, so you turn the subwoofer volume knob up until bass feels strong. The problem is this creates bass that's loud but terrible. When subwoofer gain is excessive, bass becomes boomy, muddy, and overwhelming. It masks dialogue, drowns out mid-range detail, and fatigues your ears. Movies sound like continuous rumble rather than precise, impactful bass hits. Here's what's actually happening. Your main speakers are reproducing bass up to the crossover point, let's say 80 Hz. Your subwoofer is also reproducing those same frequencies because its gain is set too high. Now you have overlap where both the main speakers and subwoofer are pumping out 60 to 80 Hz bass. This creates a peak in that region that sounds boomy and unnatural. Meanwhile, the excessive subwoofer output is exciting room modes, which are resonant frequencies where your room naturally amplifies certain bass notes. The correct approach is to set subwoofer gain moderately, then use your AV receiver's calibration and level controls to fine-tune integration. A good starting point is the subwoofer's volume knob around the 12 o'clock position, halfway up. Then run your receiver's auto-calibration. The target level at your listening position should be around 75 decibels for the subwoofer channel. This provides strong bass without overwhelming everything else. If bass feels weak after proper calibration, the problem is probably placement or room acoustics, not insufficient gain. Problem 2. Wrong crossover, creating gaps or bloat. The crossover frequency determines where your system splits bass between main speakers and subwoofer. Set too low, and you create a gap where neither your speakers nor subwoofer adequately covers certain frequencies. Set too high, and you get overlap that makes bass bloated and localizable, meaning you can tell exactly where your subwoofer is instead of bass feeling integrated into the soundstage. The standard recommendation is 80 Hz for most home theater systems. This is Dolby's guideline, Thitz's standard, and what most auto-calibration systems default to. 80 Hz is low enough that bass is non-directional and feels integrated, but high enough that typical bookshelf or tower speakers don't strain trying to reproduce it. For many systems, 80 Hz is exactly right. However, speakers vary. Small satellite speakers with 4 or 5-inch drivers struggle below 100 Hz and benefit from crossing higher at 100 or even 120 Hz. Large tower speakers with substantial woofers can sometimes handle bass down to 60 Hz cleanly. The key is matching the crossover to your speaker's actual capability. If your speakers sound strained during bass-heavy content, raise the crossover to take pressure off them. If bass sounds disconnected and boomy, try lowering the crossover slightly. Problem 3. Double crossover destroying clarity. This is a subtle mistake that ruins bass for people who don't realize they're making it. Many subwoofers have a built-in crossover control on the back panel, usually a knob that goes from 40 Hz up to 150 Hz or higher. Meanwhile, your AV receiver also has a crossover setting for the subwoofer channel. If both crossovers are active, you're filtering the bass twice, and this creates phase shifts and response issues that make bass sound wrong. Here's what happens. Your receiver applies its crossover at 80 Hz, rolling off bass sent to the main speakers and redirecting it to the subwoofer output. Then your subwoofer applies its own crossover at whatever you've set on the back panel. If that's also 80 Hz, you're applying the same filter twice in series. This creates a steeper roll-off than intended and introduces phase shift that can cause cancellation with your main speakers. The correct setup for most home theater systems is to use your receiver's crossover and bypass the subwoofer's internal one. On the subwoofer itself, set the crossover control to its maximum value or to a bypass position if available. This passes the full signal to the subwoofer and lets your receiver handle all the crossover duties. Some subwoofers label this ELF mode. By using only one crossover in the chain, you get cleaner bass with proper phase relationships. Problem 4. Phase and distance killing integration. Phase and distance settings are time alignment tools that ensure bass from your subwoofer and main speakers arrives at your ears simultaneously. When these are wrong, bass at the crossover region can partially cancel instead of adding together, creating a weak spot right where your subwoofer and speakers hand off. This makes bass sound thin and disconnected, even though both the subwoofer and speakers are working. Most subwoofers have a phase switch with 0 and 180-degree options, and some have continuously variable phase controls. Most AV receivers have a distance or delay setting for the subwoofer channel. These settings compensate for the physical distance between your subwoofer and listening position and for acoustic delays caused by cabinet design and room reflections. Here's how to optimize phase and distance. Start with the phase switch at 0 degrees. Play bass-heavy content with a strong crossover region around 60 to 80 Hz. Listen for bass impact and fullness. Then flip the phase switch to 180 degrees and listen again. One position will sound fuller and more impactful with better integration. That's the correct phase setting for your room and placement. If your subwoofer has variable phase, fine-tune from there. For distance settings in your receiver, most auto-calibration systems measure this acoustically and set it automatically, but you can verify and tweak manually. If increasing the subwoofer distance setting by a foot or two makes bass sound fuller and better integrated, the automatic measurement was slightly off. Small distance changes of 6 to 12 inches can make noticeable differences in how tightly the subwoofer locks in with your main speakers. Problem 5. Placement and room modes. Even with perfect settings, subwoofer placement dramatically affects bass performance because of room modes. These are resonant frequencies where your room's dimensions cause certain bass notes to be amplified or canceled. The corners of your room are pressure zones where bass accumulates. The center of your room and positions equidistant from walls are often null zones where bass cancels out. The classic subwoofer crawl technique helps find optimal placement. Place the subwoofer in your main listening position. Play bass-heavy music or test tones. Then crawl around the floor perimeter of your room, listening for where bass sounds fullest and most even. That's where your subwoofer should go. This works because the acoustics are reciprocal. If bass sounds good at a floor location when the sub is at your seat, it will sound good at your seat when the sub is at that floor location. Common good positions are corner placement for maximum output, or along the front wall offset from corners for balanced response. Bad positions are dead center of the room, or exactly halfway between walls, where room modes create cancellation. Even small position changes of a few inches can dramatically alter bass response by moving the subwoofer out of a null or peak. Problem 6. Listening position in a null. Sometimes the subwoofer settings and placement are perfect, but your listening position is in a bass null. If you're sitting exactly in the center of your room or at a position where opposing room modes cancel, no amount of subwoofer adjustment will fix weak bass at your seat. The room acoustics are actively canceling certain frequencies at that location. The solution is either moving your seating or adding bass trapping and acoustic treatment to reduce room modes. Moving your seat forward or back by 2 or 3 feet can take you out of a null and into a region where bass is stronger. Adding corner bass traps absorbs excess energy in pressure zones, smoothing out room modes and making bass more even throughout the room. Even simple solutions like thick cushions or fabric panels in corners help reduce the worst peaks and nulls. Problem 7. Room correction misused. Modern AV receivers include room correction systems like Odyssey, Dirac, or EPOW that can measure and correct bass response. These are powerful tools when used correctly, but they have limitations. Room correction can reduce peaks where bass is too loud by applying equalization cuts. It can smooth uneven response and make bass more consistent, but it cannot fix deep nulls where bass is cancelled by room modes. You can't boost your way out of cancellation. If room correction measures a 20 decibel null at 40 Hz, applying 20 decibels of boost just makes your subwoofer work harder producing output that still cancels. The result is distortion and strain without actual improvement. The correct use of room correction is to address moderate peaks and smooth response, while placement and seating position handle nulls. Also, room correction should be the final step after placement, level, crossover, and phase are optimized. Don't use room correction to compensate for bad settings. Fix the fundamentals first, then use correction for final polish. The right setup sequence. Let me walk you through the proper sequence for subwoofer setup, because order matters. First, place your subwoofer using the crawl method or starting with corner or front wall placement. Second, set the subwoofer's gain to a moderate starting point around halfway. Third, set your receiver's crossover to 80 Hz for typical speakers. Fourth, disable or bypass the subwoofer's internal crossover by setting it to maximum or LFE mode. Fifth, optimize phase by testing 0 and 180 degrees and choosing whichever sounds better. Sixth, verify or adjust distance settings in your receiver for best integration. Seventh, run your receiver's auto-calibration and verify the results. Eighth, fine-tune levels if needed to achieve balanced bass that's powerful but not overwhelming. Finally, consider room treatment if you have severe peaks or nulls that can't be addressed through placement and settings. Following this sequence ensures each step builds on a solid foundation rather than trying to compensate for earlier mistakes with later adjustments. Your subwoofer's disappointing bass is almost never caused by the subwoofer itself being inadequate. It's caused by wrong settings that prevent the subwoofer from performing at its capability. Excessive gain creates muddy, boomy bass. Wrong crossover creates gaps or bloat. Double crossovers destroy clarity. Wrong phase and distance kill integration. Bad placement triggers room modes. Listening position in nulls creates weak bass. Room correction misuse tries to fix unfixable problems. Fix these settings systematically, and your bass transforms from disappointing to impressive without buying anything new. Tight, impactful bass that enhances movies and music instead of overwhelming or disappearing. Integration so seamless you can't tell where your subwoofer is. Output that shakes your room without muddiness or fatigue. This is what proper subwoofer setup delivers. And it's all hiding behind settings most people never optimize. If this video showed you which subwoofer settings were destroying your bass and how to fix them for dramatically better low-frequency performance, smash that like button and subscribe for more home theater truth. Drop a comment telling me which setting was wrong in your system and how much difference fixing it made. Let's help each other finally get the bass we paid for. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the tight, powerful bass you're about to unlock.